It should probably go without saying that we need to be sure our QuickBooks files and the data contained within them is properly secured. While we may be a little bit hesitant to try to perform what is often considered an IT task, rest assured that even though it's an extremely important task, setting users and permissions in QuickBooks is straightforward. Also, remember that there are some differences in the user security and permission settings between the different editions of QuickBooks. We're using the Pro version. Pro and Premier are basically the same. If you're using the Enterprise Edition, there will be differences because, of course, the Enterprise version works a lot differently than these other two. But let's go ahead and take a look at how we can set up users and their permissions for our company file. The first thing I'm going to do is just minimize the homepage navigator because we don't need it. Then we're going to move to the top of the screen. We're going to display the company menu by giving a click or a tap and choose Setup Users and Passwords, and then move over and do our final click or tap on Setup Users. What we can see is that QuickBooks always comes with an admin account. This is the one that will be there by default. It also currently tells us who is logged on, and in this case, it is only us. If we had multiple users and more than one person was logged on, we could see the list as well as who was currently logged on. Since many administrative activities require exclusive use of the file, this can actually be important information. Now, if we look over on the right, we see that we have options to add, edit, delete, and view users. Just as an FYI, the Enterprise Edition also allows for roles to be defined as well as users to be duplicated. We're going to start, though, with just the basics of creating a new user. So we'll go ahead and click or tap the Add User option in the upper right. The first thing that we need to do is provide a username for the individual as well as a password. Then, of course, as is always the case when we do passwords, we have to confirm it to make sure that we typed it correctly. Now, as far as usernames go, it kind of depends on the culture of your company. If it's a small company and very casual, then maybe just first names or first names with the last initial. Or you could alternately make full names. It certainly is up to you. I would just try to be consistent in how you create the usernames. We're going to create an account for one of our salespeople whose name is Michael Brooks, so we're going to enter a username of Michael B. We won't go into all of the nitty-gritty details of how to set up good passwords, but I think most of us are aware that the more characters we have and the more combinations, for example, upper and lowercase letters, as well as alphanumerics and symbols, the better. We'll go ahead and keep this one fairly simple. I'm going to use the password Apple with a capital A followed by the number 3. We then need to confirm that password by typing it correctly. Now, I hate to even mention it, but technically we can create a user account without a password. But for what I hope are a lot of obvious reasons, this is not a good idea. And QuickBooks will only nag you about it if you do. So, my best recommendation is always include a password. Another thing to make sure we know is that only the admin account can create or change user passwords. Okay, now that we have this little bit of demographics figured out, let's go ahead and click Next at the bottom of the screen and get started with the good stuff. For each user, we have 3 options to choose from. They can have access to all areas of QuickBooks, selected areas of QuickBooks that we will then designate, or something called External Accountant. In general, we want to be very careful about providing access to all areas of QuickBooks. That should be reserved for the few who truly need access to all areas. If we do choose that option, QuickBooks is going to not so subtly inquire if we're absolutely sure that we want to do that, to which we can say yes or no. So if it's asking us the question, we might want to consider it twice. The other interesting thing is that there is an option for an accountant, which gives them full access to the accounting, but not to sensitive customer data like credit cards. How perfect is that? QuickBooks knows that even the accountants shouldn't have access to all of the information, and it just reinforces what we've been talking about. All access really should be limited to very, very few people. Even managers and management, including CIOs and CFOs, usually do not need to have access to all areas of the QuickBooks file. For our example, we're talking about Michael, and Michael is a salesperson, and he definitely does not need access to all areas, so we're going to leave the default of selected areas of QuickBooks and click or tap Next. When we choose selected areas, we'll then be presented with a series of 10 or so screens asking us if the user should have no access, full access, or selective access to the specific areas of QuickBooks. I think we understand no access as well as full access. We'll be able to select access from screens for sales and accounts receivable, purchases and accounts payable, checking and credit cards, inventory, time tracking, payroll, and employees. There's also something known as sensitive accounting activities, as well as sensitive financial reporting. By now, we should understand the different components of QuickBooks that these screens all refer to. If not, then we probably shouldn't be tasked in setting up these users' profiles without some assistance. We are familiar with them, so we won't go through every possible option for each of them. But let's take a look at a select few that we're setting up for Michael. Now, this first screen is specifically about sales and accounts receivable. Since Michael is in sales, he probably needs to have access. The question is, does he need to have full access or selective access? Just so that we can see how the selective access works, let's go ahead and choose that option. This now enables further options. Should Michael be able to create transactions only, create and print transactions, create transactions and create reports, view complete customer credit card numbers, and any combination of the first series and or the checkbox. Remember that with radio buttons, we can only choose one. And since Michael is in sales, he obviously needs to both create and print, and I think he also needs to be able to create reports. How else does a salesperson know how they're doing? Should Michael be able to view complete customer credit card numbers? Yes, because customers are often going to need to pay Michael at the same time he's making a sale, and we certainly do not want to hinder them from doing so. By allowing him to see the credit card numbers, that will allow him to do his job. With those options selected, we can then click Next. As I said, we'll now go ahead and progress through all of the rest of the screens with basically the same types of choices. Selective access is always going to give us a variety of choices suitable for that particular portion or component of QuickBooks. We simply need to make the appropriate choices for all of them. Since our sales guy, Michael, is in sales, he doesn't need to ever worry about making purchases or worrying about accounts payable. So he's going to have no access to that area. Likewise, he has no need to be in checking and credit cards. And even though he sells our product, he doesn't have anything to do with managing the inventory. Michael may need to manage his own time, and he may be a manager who needs to manage the time of others. So again, when we get to time tracking, we'll go ahead and allow him to have selective access and to create transactions and reports. He needs to have nothing to do with payroll and employees, no access to sensitive accounting activities, nor to sensitive financial reports. Now, if you were paying close attention, you remember that I said there were 10 screens, but then I only listed and we've only seen 8. The last 2 screens relate to the user's ability to create or delete items, not to actually create them, which is what the previous 8 were about. This is designated for changes and deletions in the areas to which they have access, as well as in relation to closing dates. So should Michael be able to change or delete transactions in the areas he has access to? We'll go ahead and say yes, because primarily that's about sales and his own timekeeping. Should this user also have the ability to change or delete transactions that were recorded before the closing date? Well, that's kind of a different story. Remember, the closing date is the point at which we've closed the books, and all of the accounting should be done. If there's some kind of transaction that needs to be handled, Michael might need some type of supervisor or managerial assistance to do that. So we're going to leave that at no. See, I promised you it wouldn't be that bad. After we're through all 10 screens, we're presented with a nice summary of what we've designated so that we can review it and make sure it's appropriate. As a general rule, if in doubt, take away permissions. The worst case is that someone gets a little bit cranky because they can't do something they want, and we need to go in and modify their permissions. That is much better than having someone doing things that they should not be able to do for even a short period of time. After we review all of the options and whether they can create, print, or see reports, then we can scroll to the bottom of the screen and simply click or tap Finish. Depending on our preferences, we may see a warning that says you previously instructed QuickBooks to log in automatically as the admin user for the following applications. You may want to choose a different user for the automatic logon or modify the access rights. This is just informational, and we'll click OK, and that will bring back, or at least display, our user list. We can now see that we both have an admin account and the Michael B account. We would just continue this for all of our remaining employees, or at least all of those who should have some access to QuickBooks. I know a lot of companies and a lot of people that put off setting up their users and permissions. It's important to go through the steps of setting up users early on in the QuickBooks implementation. While there is the default and all powerful admin account, it actually should not be used by everyone. And it really shouldn't even be used by you either. Best practices suggest that you create an account for yourself, even if it does provide all access to all areas. Then, of course, each user should have their own profile as well, just like on the regular computer system and network. Sharing of profiles is not a good idea. And now you know how to configure users and their permissions to ensure everyone has the permissions that aren't too restricted and aren't too lax. Everyone's permission and access will be just right.